Hello, good evening. You're very welcome to what is the last in this series of Generations Revisited. Generations was an 8-part television series that I had won the commission to independently produce in 1986 from Channel 4 television in the United Kingdom. That's 35 years ago. And the inspiration to do it at the time arose out of my observation that there was very little celebration of people who had made a success of their lives at that time, particularly of women. It was a very difficult time for women to rise through the ranks of their many fields of enterprise work and the arts, but these women had. These women had reached the top, the pinnacle of success in the worlds of business, management, broadcasting, journalism, writing, editing magazines, politics, couture design. And these were women who had done it by themselves. They were independent women, which was so impressive. And nowadays, there's an expression that goes around quite a lot, which is, unless you see it, you can't be it. So I think that there is a value in watching this series for all of us, but for perhaps younger generations coming up. And also, one of the features of the theme of the series was that through the eyes of these people who had made a success of their lives, by reflecting on their past, on their childhood memories, and on their recollections of family life and their early days, that they in turn could be celebrating the influences of previous generations on the shaping of their lives and destinies and the contribution that that had made to them. It was a very easy, relaxed format. It was unscripted. The women arrived, no fuss, no bother, no PR companies, no social media. They arrived, they sat down, and they talked for about half an hour. And they didn't talk about their business or what they were doing then or their recent successes or their recent books or what they had achieved. They just talked about their early childhood recollections. And I believe that's part of its magic. I hope you agree. So tonight's guest was Sybil Connolly, who is the last in the series that I'm presenting to you now, but she was the first person that I interviewed. And I did it in a studio in Dublin because I was then thinking that if I won the commission, I would have to assemble crews, I would have to hire in facilities and technical people to do that side of the business. And so this was in the studio, and at the last minute, I realized there was very little on the walls around me. So I then put on my dressing set hat and I brought down a number of small items from my home, which people who have been in my home and members of my family will certainly recognize on the shelf behind me. They're all little pottery and pieces that you would have in the kitchen, but they're all of Irish design. The famous Shanagari pottery, the Stevens pottery, and there, in a way, I was taking the opportunity to showcase what I could of what was good coming out of Ireland at that time by way of design. And I did that in my clothes. Everything I wore was all Irish, but I didn't get anything from anybody. They were pieces from Michael Mortell, who was selling out of Harrods at that time, his beautiful signature raincoats and very nice suits for women. Famous Paul Costello, who at that time had been dressing Princess Diana so beautifully, and she wore his clothes very beautifully because the style suited her height and elegance and her whole demeanour. And Pat Crowley. And what I did was put together pieces, and I have to tell now, I don't know if Paul Costello knew, but his manager at the time in his factory gave me a pass to get into the wholesale sale that took place once a year up in London, not too far from where Channel 4 was in Charlotte Street, actually, as it happened. So if you were prepared to take on the fight and go in through rails and rails and rails of things and pick up a few pieces at rock bottom prices, then you were lucky. And that was what I did. And it's interesting that I'm talking to you about this now when our guest, Sybil Connolly, is going to feature in episode 8 as Ireland's most celebrated couture designer at that time in the 1950s, when she was making it very big in America and doing whirlwind tours of America and Australia on the front of Vogue, being sold in doing design work with Tiffany's in New York and Lord and Taylor and Bloomingdale's and all the wonderful shops in New York. Jacqueline Kennedy chose one of her pleated linen dresses as her official First Lady portrait in the White House. And one of the things that she had done was develop a technique with linen, which she mixed for evening wear with Carrick Macross lace. But I'm not going to talk about that now because I provided all of that background information in the details for you. Just to say that the Hunt Museum in Ireland has archived her history and her background and details of her design and her acclaim at that time on the world of couture. So Sybil Connolly came along to the interview and she brought with her a little tiny miniature basket, which was in a shape that anyone who looks at any of the archives of the 1960s, of the swinging 60s in London, any archive footage that you will see the women walking along with these rather round baskets over their arm. And it was very much a feature of the 1960s. You could put everything in there. You could put your shopping, your bananas and oranges, and you could have your handbag in the basket, but it sat up on the arm and it was solid in its composition. And she had a little mini one of those, which she had got from her grandfather, who was Welsh, and with whom she spent quite a lot of time in her early years. So I will leave it for Sybil to talk about her life, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that as a result of this, you may have a look at the Hunt Museum's archive on Sybil Connolly and see what she was doing with fabric way back then in the 1950s. Thank you very much.
Going to go back and bring you back to as far as you can remember, to your roots. Tell me, Sybil Connolly, where were you born?
Well, actually, I wasn't born in Ireland. I was born in Wales. My father, of course, was Irish, but my mother was Welsh. And she happened to be staying with her father when I was born. And actually, I spent a lot of my childhood in Wales because my grandfather was very fond of me and I was very fond of him. And I really, until he died when I was about 12, I spent a great deal of time with him.
Well, where was your father during that period?
Oh, my father had come back to Ireland. I mean, he was, and my mother and the rest of the family were living in Ireland. But I think I spent more years in Wales. I did spend more years in Wales than any other member of my family. And yet, I have been back to Wales. I went 25 years without going back, but I have been back to Wales in the last few years. And I have no hesitation in saying that I feel more at home in Ireland now than I do in Wales. Or in fact, in anywhere. I don't want to live anywhere else in the Ireland.
Were you given any choice in whether you stayed in Wales at that time, or were circumstances such that you had to?
Well, I suppose to a certain extent circumstance. I mean, I hadn't finished my schooling, so I couldn't say, well, I'm going to have a career and I'm going to live in Wales. So circumstances were such, I think, that I had to come back to Ireland. But then when I decided to be a dress designer, I went to London to train because that was the best place in those days to train to be a dress designer. And so the actual course was 3 years, but war broke out when I'd been there for 13 months. So I did come back to Ireland then, and I've never left.
What sort of parents did you have? Were they aloof, or were you very close to them?
Oh, no, they were wonderful parents, both of them. I was closer to my mother than I was to my father, but I think it was really because we had very similar likes and dislikes. And undoubtedly, she was the greatest influence in my life. I have no hesitation in saying that. She had enormous style in everything she did. And it wasn't a studied style. She didn't spend hours deciding what to put on or anything like that. It was a natural elegance. She always was beautifully dressed. She had the knack of choosing the right scarf to go with the right dress, you know, without it looking as though she spent hours doing it. And she created a wonderful house wherever we lived. And she presented the food we ate beautifully. She just was a really remarkable woman.
Was that something that stemmed from her, or was that from her background or her training?
Well, I suppose to a certain extent from her background, but I think that quality of style is almost something one is born with. And I don't look at all like her. She was very tall and blonde and had blue eyes, and my younger sister looks quite like her. And I think to a certain extent my younger sister has inherited that natural elegance from her. I mean, I feel that I spend so much time thinking about clothes for my clients that I really hardly have time. You know, the shoemaker's children never has shoes. There's rather, in fact, Givenchy in Paris, who is a great, great and very old friend of mine, I often say to him when I'm writing letters, I do wish I lived near you, because in that case I'd get you to make all my clothes, because I truly haven't time to think of my own clothes.
Was your mother a career woman? Did she have a job?
Oh, no, because in those days women, you know, didn't have careers. And in fact, I was the first person in my family who expressed a wish to have a career.
How many in your family were there?
Oh, there were just three of us. There were three girls, and I'm the middle one. I have an older sister and I have a younger sister. But we were a very close-knit family. We still are a very close-knit family. And, you know, I don't think anyone is a success on one's own. I think it's a combination of people and circumstances that make one a success. And I consider that I'm a catalyst in a way, and that each member of my staff and all of my family, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, that they all are there, very, very necessary to make the whole, which is Sybil Connolly. I mean, even taking the cleaning woman in Marion Square, I mean, I couldn't be without her. I couldn't be without my secretary assistant, who's been with me for years. I couldn't be without my houseman when I entertain. He's absolutely perfect. I couldn't be without my sister, who sustains me, and both my sisters. So I think that the whole thing is planned. You know, it's like a tapestry with all the threads weaving together to make a whole.
It's planned now, but how did you see that whole fabric being created originally?
Well, I think when it is being created, that one isn't really aware of it being created. I think that things evolve and make the whole. The first time I went to America, which was in 1953, I had no idea that was going to change my whole life, which it did. I mean, I just thought it would be the only time I'd ever go to America, and little did I realize that from then onwards I would go to America at least twice a year, which is 33 years ago this spring.
And what brought about that trip to America?
Well, an American fashion group from Philadelphia saw my collection, and they just happened to be in Ireland at the horse show and came in and asked me to put on a fashion show for them. And I did, and they were very nice and said, well, why don't you bring the collection to America? And I must say, I thought they were really just being polite. And then when they got back to America, they wrote and invited me out at their expense to be their guest. So I took my collection there, and I was very lucky. It was just a great success.
But you had already started on your career. You were well established in business in 1953 at that stage.
Oh, yes, I did, but I'd never shown to an audience outside Ireland. I mean, those Americans were the first time that anyone outside Ireland had ever seen my clothes.
Had you clear objectives then as to where you wanted to go with your design and your career?
No, I don't think I had. I think that I didn't see beyond the next collection, you know, and it's a very time-absorbing thing creating a collection. And but I think, again, looking back on my life, that it was all part of a plan, you know, something bigger than us. I must say that the other my mother was undoubtedly a wonderful influence in my life. And the other great influence in my life I think, has been my religion. Now, my mother, being a Protestant, I grew up spent my early childhood in a wonderful Protestant household. And in fact, I can honestly say that I have more non-Catholic friends than Catholic friends. But I have no doubt in my own mind that what I want to be is what I want to be, but is a Catholic. And it has been a wonderful influence in my life and a great source of consolation and stability.
Looking back on those days that you spent with your grandfather,
Mm.
was he a great influence on you?
Oh, yes, he was, because he belonged to a generation that felt that discipline was a very important thing. And I was glad I learned that, because people talk so much about freedom nowadays, but truly, real freedom is discipline. And I don't think I would have been managed to fit so many things into my life if I hadn't learned those early lessons of discipline.
And how close a relationship did you have with him in those days?
Oh, a wonderful relationship with him. Really wonderful
Did
relationship.
he take an interest in you?
Oh, yes. And he was a great gardener. And I think that my interest in gardening certainly stems from him. I mean, he had a very famous garden. People from miles along way used to come and see the garden.
Now, where was that in Wales?
It was, well, it was outside Swansea. It was about 20 miles. It was in South Wales.
Did he teach you about gardening?
Well, yes. I mean, subconsciously, I think I was taking in an awful lot. I wasn't consciously taking it in, but certainly I feel that my interest stems from his interest.
And you have happy memories of those days with
Oh,
him? Have you?
very happy memories.
Did he talk about the past to you a lot?
Well, he was a very, very intelligent and wise man. And a lot of the proverbs or sayings that have helped me in my life have come from him. I remember him saying, it doesn't matter what happens to you in life. What matters is how you behave when it's happening. And I've thought of that quite often when, you can't have a life that's all up. You have to have downs too. And in my down moments, I often have thought about that phrase. And then another one, he wasn't, although he came from an aristocratic background, he was the least snobbish of people. And he used to say, it doesn't matter who you are, it's what you are that matters. And so, yes, his wisdom has stayed with me, I must say.
What did you call him?
Oh, just Grandpa.
Grandpa.
Yes.
And was his passing a great loss to you?
Yes, it was, really. But when my mother died, it was a great loss to both my sisters and to me. But we discovered, and perhaps you have to lose someone that you love very much to make this discovery that actually they don't die. I mean, death is a word, and you keep them alive by talking about them, and we don't talk about her deliberately. It comes naturally to us. I mean, we still say after 20 years, she's dead 20 years now, or Mummy would hate us to do that, or, how she'd love that. And I think, I don't feel she's dead. I feel that she's, that expression, somebody has passed on. Well, I realize now that she's passed on to another level, and we in our human capacity cannot see through that veil on that other level. And so it's as though she's still with us.
How did she help you get over the death of your grandfather, her father?
Well, of course, she was very distressed too, really, because she was very close to him and devoted to him. So to a certain extent, I think we all helped each other. And that, I mean, pain, you do grow through pain. I think if you face pain, that you do grow through it. And I think it is a necessary part of maturing, to go through pain.
Did you walk in the countryside with that grandfather?
Oh, yes.
Aware of the surroundings?
Yes. And you see, I was born in the country because he lived in the country. And I love the country. And that's why I love living in Merrion Square, because if you have to live in a city, it's a wonderful place to live, because, that you can see the seasons coming and going, and you see the lilac and the laburnum and all the other wonderful flowering trees coming out in Merrion Square. It's a very nice place to live, I must say.
Well, renowned as you are for your contribution to the world of design in every aspect of design, where do you think that interest and that eye for beauty and for design stems?
Well, I think it must have stemmed from my mother. I think that I'm talking more about my mother than my father, but that was only because he encouraged me in every other way. But naturally, being a woman, the ideas of fashion and style came mostly from her. And I think I really do think it came totally from her.
Why was she so stylish?
I don't know. I think she was born stylish. I mean, she just always looked wonderful. And I remember once my nephew was getting married, and the car she was in got delayed or lost or something. So we were all getting rather anxious and peering at the end of the church, waiting to see was she going to arrive. And I turned round just as she was coming into the church, and she was well into her 60s then. And I remember thinking, my goodness, she's the most elegant woman in the church, She just had that. It's almost impossible. It's as impossible to define style as it is to define charm. It really is.
What are your first memories of being aware of her physical beauty and attractiveness?
Well, I suppose I must have been about 6 or 7 before I realized that she was a very beautiful woman. I suppose, seeing other mothers and realizing that she was very tall, so she rather stood out from other people. And she gave me that basket when I was 5 years old.
Really? Tell us about the basket.
And it's amazing. Look at the size of it. I mean, I can't tell you how chic I felt when I had that basket. And it stayed with me all these years. And it began my love affair with baskets. I love baskets, and I have them in all shapes and sizes. And in fact, I laughingly say, but it's only semi-jocose. It's really rather true that my life is filed in baskets. I've just finished writing a book about private Irish gardens, and everything is in an enormous basket. The transparencies, the text, everything is in that basket. And when I do a collection, I carry the sketches around with me. I carry the fabrics around with me in a basket. So, because it's so wonderful, you can carry it from room to room.
Now, why did she give you this little basket? What was the purpose of that gift?
I can't remember really. I was only about 5 when I got it, so it really is rather a long time. But I remember, putting it over my arm and feeling terribly grown up the way children do when they have something like that. It's beautifully made, though. I do think Irish baskets are particularly beautiful.
They are, but is that a particularly Irish shape?
No, because this would have been bought in Wales, I should think.
Oh, of course.
The Irish baskets that I love best, I think, are the ones made, from the reeds, which are peculiar to Ireland, and I get them made in all different shapes and sizes. And it's my favourite present to send to somebody away, to send them an Irish basket, because it's sort of indigenous to the country. It's different. But my really big baskets are made from willow, because they need to be rather strong. And in the years I used to stay at Lismore Castle with Adela Stair, there was a man down by the river who used to make wonderful baskets from willow. And it was so romantic, because you went down this great hill to where he lived in a cottage, and there was the river, and the willows grew in the river, you see. So you had the willows growing in the river, then you had several that were lying beside the river drying out, and there he was weaving away these beautiful willow baskets. So I have quite a collection.
As a child, did you rummage in your mother's wardrobe?
Oh, yes, we were always dressing up.
All of the sisters?
Yeah, all of us, the three of us were always dressing, putting on her clothes and one thing and another. And then the other great thing we did on a wet day was my grandmother even had an enormous amount of linen, bed linen. And that was a great treat on a wet day, open up these great trunks of bed linen. And I still have sheets belonging to my grandmother.
Was that your Irish grandmother?
No, that was my
Welsh grandmother.
Yes. And I don't use them very often. I mean, you have to use them once a year, because you have to launder them, because they turn yellow if you don't launder them at least once a year. But I laughingly say there's about 4 or 5 weeks when I only have these exquisite sheets. It's rather like sleeping in a handkerchief, And I laughingly say this is my festival of sheets, this period.
Looking back again on the family background, was anyone ever responsible for pointing you in the direction of design? Do you ever remember a teacher or anyone indicating that you had a talent in that direction?
No, and actually I really wanted to be a writer before I wanted to be, dress designing was actually my second choice. But, when you're about 17, you're terribly impatient. And I wrote a few short stories and sent them off, and they were all rejected. So I now realize that, famous authors get things rejected sometimes 30 times before they're accepted. But I was too impatient. I thought, oh, no, I obviously have no gift for writing. And so the second thing I wanted to do was to be a dress designer. So that's what I did.
And when did that start?
Well, that started I went to train in 1938 and in London. And it was really, at that time, the most famous fashion house in the world. We did all the clothes for the British royal family. In fact, that was the year that Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent, who's now dead, got married, and we did all her trousseaux. So that was sort of very exciting. And it was the time when Britain had an empire, so the people would come home from India, and buy enough clothes to wear for 3 years. The long garden party dresses with the parasols to match, and the Debs wore long white dresses with 3 feathers in the back. So it was a wonderful 13 months, really. And of course, the world changed after that. The war changed all of that. All of that went. The empire went, and the whole thing changed.
You expressed earlier that you were the first to show an interest in having a career in the family.
Yes.
How was that met with?
Well, at first, amazement, and I had more trouble coaxing my father than my mother, actually, which I thought was rather interesting. I think men don't really want their daughters to go away from home.
And how did he react?
Oh, he was very upset about it, and I always remember when he came to see me off on the train, when I was going to London to train, he said, the very last thing he whispered in my ear, "Now you come back home if you're not happy," but my mother, I think, I wouldn't say she was ambitious for me, but I think that she felt that I wanted to express myself. And so she did everything to encourage it.
She encouraged it?
Yes, she did.
But your father was more wary about it, was he?
Yes, very definitely.
There weren't any tears and tantrums involved?
Oh, no. No, I didn't have to beg and plead, really. But I did feel... now, I must say that I don't by any means think that being a housewife is a second-class occupation. In fact, where I differ very much to the feminists today is that they do think this. I think all of us have talents. I really do think that. And surely there isn't a greater talent in the world than making a beautiful home and bringing up children. I mean, those are exceptional talents because you next are forming the next generation. So I think that is a supreme and wonderful talent. And so it wasn't that made me think, I didn't feel, I wanted to be something more than a housewife. It was just a feeling that I had that I wanted to go away and do something.
And it must have been very unusual in those days for someone to have
yes.
taken this stand. And also for your parents to let you go away from them.
Oh, yes, it was. They were very wonderful to allow me do it.
Did you have a great sense of freedom when you went to London at that stage?
Oh, I was frightfully lonely. I really was. I had never experienced homesickness before, and I was very homesick. And, we always had a long Easter holiday from where I was training, and I would come home, and it was agony again when I had to go back. So, it seems rather dreadful to say this, but I won't say I was almost happy when war was declared. But, at least I was going to be home again for a little while. Now, I never at any time thought, well, shall I give it up? I mean, I knew I was going to stick it out, but it wasn't easy.
When you came back?
Yes.
And what did you do then? Did you go on with your career? Or at that
yes,
time
I did, because, you see, everybody thought the war would be over in 6 months. I mean, nobody thought it would go on for 6 years. And somebody asked me there was no couture house, there was no model girls in Ireland in those days. And somebody asked me if I would take a job just temporarily running Richard Allen's in Grafton Street. So I wrote to Mr. Bradley, who owned this fashion house where I was training in London, and I said, should I do it? And he said, oh, yes, you must do it, because at least it's another aspect of fashion. You mustn't just stay at home and do nothing. So I did that. And then I started the first really couture house in Ireland. And
how did you finance that?
Oh, well, I didn't finance it at that time. I was only a director of Richard Allen's. It was, Richard Allen's who really financed it. And then it was from there I first made my first trip to America. And I was there for 4 years after my first trip to America. But I could see that to a certain extent there was a conflict of interest, that they were a wonderful ready-to-wear firm. Superb ready-to-wear firm. And it was sort of almost a nuisance having me with my, couture workroom. And so then I decided, and I must say this, well, you really have a lot of courage when you're young. It was the courage of ignorance, I think, that I would break out on my own and that I would buy the house in Merrion Square. And lots of people offered me money to finance me.
Offered you money?
Yes, which was rather wonderful. Helena
It was an
Rubinstein.
extraordinary experience.
Yes, it was. Helena Rubinstein was one. And I was so grateful to it, but I decided that I would only use my own money because I thought, well, if it doesn't work, then I'll only have lost my own money. So I bought Merrion Square, and there was a tremendous job to do it up. I mean, it had to have central heating and everything put into it. And America was wonderful. I wrote to all of them and told them I was doing all the clients I had got in America during the 4 years. And they all wrote and said, well, when you're ready to go again, we'll be ready to go again. And what really convinced me, I think, and really made it possible was I was invited by the Australian Consolidated Press to come to Australia and to bring a collection, to design a collection. They didn't mind how many things I designed, how big it was. And to bring 3 models who were of Irish descent or origin. And you see, 1/3 of the population of Australia are Irish, which I hadn't realized then. And so I had all that finance that enabled me to close altogether for 8 months while Merrion Square was being redecorated, because I was making this collection for Australia. That's really what made it possible that happened.
Extraordinary
But the man
experience.
who owned the Australian Consolidated Press, his mother had been 20 when she first left Ireland, and he had invited several French collections and designers out to Australia. And then he happened to be in London, and he read a very big article about me in the Sunday Express, and he suddenly thought, well, my mother came from Ireland. I've never been to Ireland. I think I'd go over and see what this girl is doing. So he came and he saw, and then I got the invitation, which was, so that's why I keep saying it's all part of a plan, you see. It's all, nothing happens just casually. I think
Sounds
it's all
like a plan that was devised by somebody who had power above, but seemed to be an extremely privileged and very easy run.
Yes,
you
it
had
was.
no difficulties.
No, I didn't. I've been extraordinarily lucky in my lifetime.
And
I
all the
really
benefits
have.
of that past.
Yes, I can't tell you. I learned many years ago to count my blessings every morning when I wake up, and there are many blessings, and I'm very grateful for it.
Sybil Connolly, you're a lesson to us all. Thank you very much for bringing us down this memory lane and sharing some of your memories with us. It's been a great pleasure.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you for inviting me.